Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm Rob Levine, Special Features Editor for Global Corporate Venturing, and welcome to today's Next Wave webinar. Is now the right time to invest in autonomous driving in partnership with Denso? We're going to be discussing the ins and outs of the technology, the regulatory environment, and the market for startups. And if there's something you'd like to ask, put it in the chat, the Q&A, and we'll see if we can get to that depending on time. Now, today's panel, I'd like to introduce Tony Canestra, Director of Corporate Ventures at Denso, Mitchell Yun, Head of Office at Hyundai Mobis Ventures, Josh Berg, Managing Director at Magna Technology Ventures, and Veerbon Ketopal, CEO of Quadric. We couldn't just have CVCs on today. Quadric's an AI chip startup that is working on technology to be used in automotive systems. Now, to start off with, let's look at where we are right now. On the one hand, we had news quite recently that General Motors is shutting its Cruise Robotaxi project, having sunk billions into that. But on the other, May Mobility is launching a driverless commercial ride-hailing service, and Lyft, which obviously Uber's main competitor in the US, has announced it's going to be launching its own driverless service next year. So to start off with, I'm going to ask each of the panel, how would you say the technology and the startup environment for autonomous mobility looks right now? And I'll start with you, Josh.
How does the technology, and thank you for having me here. I'm excited to speak on the panel. So the question being, how does the technology environment look in the autonomous vehicle space? I'd say it looks exciting. I mean, all of us have, lived through the past 10 years of investing billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into this space. A lot of it just kind of evaporating into thin air over a number of years. And I think now we are really starting to see those technologies mature and allow for real products in the market. And you're seeing it, right? We've seen it, Waymo actually launching driverless robotaxis, and then a number of maybe like smaller examples, less grand examples, and we're seeing level 3 autonomy with some of the major OEMs. I mean, we're really starting to see these sensors make a difference and the compute functionality make a difference to enable real services for real people in real vehicles. And
you're an investor in Waymo, aren't you?
Yeah, I should say off the bat. So Magna's an investor in Waymo, and earlier in my career, when I was a partner at GM Ventures, the venture arm for General Motors, my first year is when GM acquired Cruise. So I've kind of lived through all of this, and it's been a very exciting time.
And how about you, Tony? How do you actually see the sector and the technology right now?
Well, I would tend to agree with Josh. I think it's an exciting time right now, in that all the work that's been done, all the investment that's been done over the last 10 years has finally sort of coalesced into what I would consider to be the first wave of what we're going to see with autonomous driving and robotaxis. I thought it was interesting announcement actually when GM said, they were stepping away from the robotaxi business with Cruise, but they were very interested to use Cruise's technology for their private vehicle sales. Thus, sending a message to the market that in the future, some of us may be able to buy and have autonomous vehicles that will be running, hopefully at level 4, level 5 capabilities, which I think is what a majority of the population now thinks is an interesting possibility for their future. On the investment side, I think it's a little bit difficult to envision where the next wave of startups might come from that would make investment in this sector interesting. But I do think there are some other possibilities around integration between EV and autonomous that might, potentially provide some opportunities.
And when you talk about level 4 and level 5 mobility, can you give us an idea of what specifically that means? Like, I guess in kind of layman's terms, and also where we are right now.
Well, certainly have Josh and Mitchell jump in as well. But I mean, in layman's terms, you think about most of what we're at right now is, I think, level 2 plus into level 3. Level 4 would require a lot less driver interaction. You would still need to be alert about what the vehicle is doing, but it would maybe be able to drive itself 80% on its own. Level 5 would be a complete commitment that the vehicle could 100% drive itself on its own with little or no attention from the driver. So I think, when you look at, for example, where Waymo's at, where they're now, applied for approval to the San Francisco Airport Commission in order to just start doing airport runs. So they're integrating, highway with city, with airport congestion. I think we're starting to see a very strong step into level 3 that I think will be quite convincing now to a majority of people that experience that.
Okay, and Mitchell, you've also been in this space for quite a long time as an investor. Like, how do you kind of th see things are changing right now? What do you think what do you think is significant that's maybe happened in the last couple of years or so?
For autonomous,
Yeah.
I think it's a mixed feeling for me. The positive side is that the invest. Let's talk about investment first. The investment, let's say 2020, 2021, we were still pouring a lot of money into level 4, hoping to, come alive. But then again, excuse me, the market has changed a lot over the past few years. We've seen a lot of collapse of the giants, right? The starting of the Argo and the GM, and who's next? And then we were like, okay, maybe we should sit back a little bit more on the investment and just relax and see how the market will turn out because the economy is like going like this with Trump. But then again, last year was a really a kick because the wave raised 1.1 billion thanks to SoftBank and other, and that was very shocking for me personally. And Waymo is stronger than ever with 5 billion raising. So those capital in, it means that investors are believing the market. They're seeing that real actual commercial things are happening, especially like Waymo 150K paid rides in a week. That's a real number, actual revenue that we haven't seen in the past. It has been just testing around San Francisco, but now it's becoming more commercial. It's becoming a real live, closer to the market and partnership with like Lyft, Uber, and all these guys. I think they're seeing multiple different streams of what should I say, revenue models, not just Robotaxi, but working with the passenger cars, working with like ride hailing like Lyft, and also those what do you call it, last mile delivery. So they have a lot of different use cases than before, and it's working. It's picking up in the market, so that's quite exciting. But the other side of the investment is like these are big players. The smaller players are struggling in raising capitals, and market the IPO market is not that good. I don't think they could get the right pricing for it. And then M&A is probably their best option for less, smaller companies. And I think it's in the market now because there's only a certain number of rounds that they could do at this time. And I think they've raised enough already. Big investors like us, we would be more comfortable putting a large amount of capital to a company like, let's say, Wave or even like Wabi. That's really, they just came back from nowhere and they have this, what do you call it, self-driving technology quite similar to Tesla is what they claim. I don't know how that's turned out, but it happens to be the later this week and early next week. I'll be talking to Wave and Wabi. So really excited to learn more. So that's the investment side. Technology side, I think the strong area is still level 3. I think level 3 is still very hard to do 100%. Just with like, let's say Tesla's end-to-end models, they could do 3 models in one and just with cameras. And that's fascinating. And there's very few companies that could achieve that level. And they claim to be 3. We think it's 2.999999, but they're trying to do level 3. And this is, Robotaxi, right? So we're excited to see how that technology turns out. Just with the camera, just with their algorithm, can they really do that? Because we're traditional, right? We like a bunch of sensors. We like lidar, radar, camera. What else? Oh, whatever sensors we want to put it, we put in the car, and then we figure out level 4, level 5. So technology, I think level 3 is still strong. Level 4 is just kind of picking up the robotaxi, but there aren't many players to see in the market.
And so what do you think of level 3? Is that's no hands, eyes on the road?
No hands. I think
Hands?
close, very close, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And Veerban, like I'm really interested in your point of view because the other three are all kind of like long-term investors, whereas you're kind of a startup who doesn't just do automotive stuff, but you're actually kind of coming into the sector and you're partnering with, well, in this case, Denso. Can you give us an idea of what it's like, kind of from your perspective, coming into the kind of autonomous mobility sector right now?
Good question. So the from our standpoint, we're the infrastructure layer, right? As AI evolves, new algorithms come in, companies push to go from 2.99 to 3 and 3.5 and 4, they need more compute on the vehicle to be low power and handle the kinds of complex AI that wants to run on there, right? So we've definitely seen last 12 months significant pickup in activity on OEMs, tier ones across the board, planning platforms a few years down the road with significant capability on ADAS. And then a few customers we're talking to who are looking at level 5 as well that are part of these OEMs as well. They are different groups within these OEMs that have a more longer term view of going after level 5. And these teams are speccing their own platforms that have 5-10 times more compute need. And we'll come to this a little bit later where I can talk more about what's going on in the AI space specifically that's driving these use cases. But we've been in this space about 7 years now, and last 12 months of activity dwarfs everything I've seen before.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up ADAS, like assistant, advanced driver assistance systems, because it's not just kind of autonomous cars necessarily. We're seeing that technology being integrated right now. And I'm also glad you mentioned AI. Like, can you give us an idea of like what the kind of recent advances in AI have really done for this kind of technology?
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it to 2019 and 2024, just a few years, there's been significant improvement in computer vision perception, particularly that runs on device. This is not the cloud vision, but more real-time on-device vision, better, prediction of pedestrian vehicle behavior around the car, just vision models. Also, we are seeing, again, last 18 to 12 months, where language models getting integrated into vision models. These are called vision language models that are driving more of their level 4, level 5 capability. And it's still changing, right? So what we're betting on is more, if you back up, think about what's happening with language models in the cloud, we're talking about full, replacing full humans, right? Writing code and software. So that advancement has integrated itself into vision models as well for the vehicle, which is driving a lot of use cases. So the VLMs got integrated. There is critical like level 2.5, level 3, which usually requires significant accuracy in terms of detection around the vehicle, has come about both in the combination of the AI capability and the platforms have evolved as well. It's been a few years in a lot of platform investment in startups that are building platforms that run these models. One of us being Quadric there, and that platform maturity along with AI maturity is really making it happen.
Okay. And like I think someone mentioned it a few minutes ago, but I'm sure as everyone's heard, there was quite a major election quite recently. And we have a couple of others coming this year, I think in Canada and Germany. And I wanted to ask, each of you, what does the regulatory environment look like for autonomous vehicles? Like, how do you kind of expect that to look? And I'll start with you, Mitchell.
That's a tough question because no one knows what Trump thinks, so this is hard. But having said that, I think that in the next 5 years, the regulatory environment will most likely build upon today's current approved level 3, which is allowed only in California and Nevada. So this is where it becomes very tricky and challenging for tier one like us because we want to do level 3 software, hardware, and supply to OEM. But at least in USA, the federal level, like there's not much movement, not much regulations, nothing have North Sparks. It's all like state by state individually that has to be tackled, and we have to follow that. So Many states, of course, allow like robotaxi testing, level 4, level 5. So testing is okay, but for like actual commercial deployment, as far as I know, there's only like 2 states or 3. Sorry, California, Nevada, and Texas. Right. So having said that, we'll probably see like level 3. Currently, the regulation, the SAE J 3000 something, and then upon that, it will just add up a little bit more. And beyond the level 3, we're seeing more movement on the level 4 or 5 on the platooning, on the what do you call it? So heavy trucks, self-driving. So that's a different area, and that's being picked up a lot in Texas, thanks to like what do you call it, Aurora and other truck companies like Wabi. So we're seeing some pickup in that area for platooning in Texas, but more of a robotaxi in both California and Texas. And this is how we see it. And lastly, Trump has kind of halted or freeze the regulations for autonomous driving and EV. So we don't know how it's going to turn out, but we don't see it very positive as he's not so climate friendly guy. So I don't know if he's going to go forward and pursue previous, Biden's policy. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, like is that how you see it as well, Josh? That kind of there might be more, I guess, an easy regulatory environment for testing this stuff, but maybe the long term, with the EV kind of component, there might be some issues there.
There will be issues, for sure. It's pretty much the only certainty around regulation. It's going to be difficult, and there are going to be issues for any area. Personally, look, every time I make an investment, I ask myself, kind of 2 questions. Like, can this team achieve, if everything that they say they're going to do comes true, is it big enough, and can this team actually do it? And then the maybe 3rd question is there a fatal flaw? Is there something here that can blow everything up? And oftentimes regulatory is that area that people look towards as, this is what could blow up this business. But fundamentally, I believe that if you're investing in technology that leads to improving the human condition, the regulation will come, right? You may have to put some effort into it. You may have to spend money to lobby and public officials, but I really believe the regulation will come. And I think we're seeing that in autonomy. I think Arizona also is a state that has opened up some regulations, and it's like one by one. But if you're in North Dakota, maybe you don't have a reason to propose a new law to open the regulation. It doesn't mean that they're anti-autonomous driving, right? But I think that ultimately, as people use these services and when they make meaningful differences in people's lives, we will be able to get over the hump on regulation.
And Tony, obviously, like Denso is a very kind of international company. We've kind of been talking about, I guess, very kind of US regulation. Do you see like internationally, maybe there are some markets that are much more advanced than others?
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. Josh and Mitchell did a great job of covering what's going on potentially in the U.S. I think our perspective would be that the Sun Belt part of the U.S. is really a prime candidate to have interstate autonomous vehicles, whether they start out with heavy duty trucking and then work into robotaxis and even personal autonomous vehicles. The U.S. government obviously is concerned about interstate travel. That's their main point of regulatory capabilities. I think state by state, as Josh pointed out, and Mitchell, Texas, Arizona, I'm sure New Mexico would follow, Nevada and California. They all seem to be thinking along the same lines of how to engender more progress in these areas. When you talk about internationally, certainly Europe is an area where I think there's going to be a lot of interesting progress, both in terms of pushing forward on EVs as well as trying to enable autonomous technologies to be participating. But that's more than likely going to be country by country initially. I think the one thing that we sort of skirt around with this whole discussion, Rob, is cold weather climates, and the fact that the technology is not really ready for prime time in cold weather climates. So when you look at a country like Spain versus a country like Germany, you're dealing with different environmental factors that then also have an impact on regulatory decisions. I mean, Josh sort of blew that when he mentioned North Dakota, right? The weather in North Dakota in the winter is not exactly conducive to running autonomous vehicles, even at level 3. So I think, that's part of the aspect of all these, countries and different regions having to deal with regulations is you can't install a single set of regulation that's going to fit all the different environmental factors you have to deal with.
And I guess just before I get to Veerbon, like just to throw a kind of question open, can anyone think of like a kind of a market that has particularly good or promising regulation for this kind of technology?
China. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the real benefits of China is, with the governmental structure, then they can think long term and they can move quickly and not nearly the same level of bureaucracy, right? And we're seeing that play out in the market with incredible vehicles that, with very high tech and autonomy and electrification, all very advanced.
And like in terms of I guess in terms of the startups, like are you kind of seeing that reflected as well and activity on that level?
I mean, if the question are the startups in China also, ahead? I don't know if it's fair to say ahead, but they're excellent. I mean, really, tremendous technology at the earliest stages coming out of China. The real challenge will be, because the rest of the world is behind, and it just works out this way that I think we kind of woke up 6 months ago and realized we were behind. And so, but it's Europe, it's North America, it's Japan, South Korea, right? I mean, all of the major automotive hubs globally are now really woke up to this notion that we're all behind. And so then the question is, like, if you're a North American OEM and will you be able to work with a Chinese startup that is, advanced in a particular area? And that's a real open question. And, my current position is probably not in the near term. It's maybe not worth the risk today.
And Veerbon, I'm quite interested in your perspective because obviously you're kind of developing the technology to go in this. You're not really kind of on the end, like kind of the ride-hailing companies. Do you kind of see there being like regulation or the regulatory environment being a big factor in like the kind of when you actually got to work with customers? Like, is it something you really have to worry about that much from a startup's point of view?
I think it plays a big role when, an OEM is forced to have certain capabilities in a vehicle versus it's optional, right? The demand for the platform drives down to a company like us in that case, right? So huge, huge impact. I was gonna, double down on China having a very centralized approach with national standards at this point. They have designated testing zones in most major cities there, very clear framework for moving from testing to commercialization. So they've definitely laid the foundation. US here is a state by state approach, very complex, right? EU, as far as I've studied, is working towards unified AV regulations, but moving slow on that front, right? And this isn't new, right? If you look at 50, 100 years ago, when automotive started to become what it is today, it was extremely fragmented in the US, right? Different, like Connecticut had a 12 miles an hour speed limit. That's where they started, and other states had their own fragmented rules, right? Eventually it consolidated, and it was driven by the automotive industry itself making progress. And so if we make good progress on autonomous vehicle capabilities, I think the regulation will come around and consolidate.
One thing I think we've been focusing a lot on kind of robotaxis and kind of the high end of the market so far. And I was curious as to whether people thought that maybe a lot of the kind of commercialization might come on maybe a smaller scale. If we're talking like kind of different kinds of, say, I guess, like small autonomous vehicles that are kind of operate in very restricted, I guess, grounds, or smaller delivery vehicles. We've seen some startups going with that, automated delivery vehicles rather than actually passenger vehicles. I mean, like I'll start with you, Tony. Like, kind of looking at that versus the big kind of robotaxis thing. Do you think there's How do you kind of see those two like parts of the sector really working right now?
Well, I think there's interesting opportunities there. In particular, lately we've got quite interested actually in humanoid robotics, sort of an extension of what's being done now in the robotic space. I think there's an interesting push over the last 2 years to think about autonomy in all different kinds of sectors. So whether it's inside a facility, manufacturing facility, even potentially a senior care facility. I just returned from a trip to Japan, where in Taiwan I happened to see quite a few autonomous serving robots, right, running around in restaurants and taking food from the kitchen out. So I think you raise an interesting point, Robin, that we focus on light vehicles, but the being able to sort of give a robot a specific task in a closed environment seems to be a much easier way to progress the technology right now. And the complexity of trying to deploy it in an automobile that's going at various speeds and in various environments and in various kinds of weather, the complexity ratchets it up to such a degree that it does take a while. It takes a while for the technology to get there. It takes a while for customer adoption to get there. It takes a while for regulations to get there. But in closed environments, it's much easier to think about the issue, to put boundaries on it, and then to design a system that's capable to excel in that kind of situation. So I do think there's lots of opportunities there.
And Virban, I can see you nodding there because obviously you don't just work with automotive stuff. Your technology is used in kind of a range of things. How do you think the automotive sector and autonomy really compares to the other things right now?
I think we're definitely seeing lots of similarities to robotics, both small delivery robots as well as humanoid robots. Humanoid robots have had some conversations there where the problem is in a way more complex because they're going after being able to do much more complex tasks than navigating a road and avoiding obstacles, right? And the models there, the AI models that we're planning to run are fairly complex. But the problem of let's have lots of compute, a good platform on board the robot or the autonomous vehicle, both of them being, at the end of the day, machines, require low power, good, high performance, low latency, and support many kinds of AI models on, right? So summary there is humanoid robotics. We're seeing very similar in aspects to autonomous vehicles.
Okay, and how about you, Josh? Because obviously, kind of, we did mention Waymo. You kind of have maybe a little bit of an inside track there. But do you think that like that kind of technology might be utilized in a wider sense and maybe on a smaller scale first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I won't speak specifically to Waymo's technology, but more broadly, we're seeing it today, and it's only going to become larger or more highly adopted, right? As Tony suggested. I mean, we're an investor in a company called Cartkin. They do autonomous delivery. It's a smaller robot. They're on college campuses. They're in industrial settings, moving goods either inside and outside from on an industrial campus or delivering burritos to students on a college campus. And that's all autonomous. And we couldn't have done that 10 years ago, right? The foundations of autonomy in like its simplest sense is you need a vision system, which is a collection of sensors, infrared, radar, LiDAR, sonar, a way to view the world. And then you need to be able to understand what you're viewing, which is, has to do with the software and the algorithms. And then, of course, has to do with your compute, because even if you can view something, you have to be able to do it quickly with low latency, oftentimes real time, especially if there's any kind of safety involved. And then finally, you have to be able to operate it, which is, the software and the infrastructure, and then of course running a business, right, with all of these inputs. And we're there now, right? Like 10 years ago when the hype really started, all you had to do was put on your PowerPoint that you were a LiDAR company and, you could raise money, right? And now we're starting to realize that LiDAR is really good in some applications, but maybe not starting to. We've realized it now over the past 10 years, but very good for some applications, but it's not good for others, right? You need to be able to look through fog or in difficult boundary conditions, difficult weather. And so it has to be a collection of sensors. And then the big problem that we had, in the early days was, even if you had all these sensors, how do you like go through this billions of lines of data, all of this information? How do you do it? And you could send it off to the cloud and analyze it, but then you can't really make any real-time decisions, and you certainly can't do it in safety critical environment. So companies like Quadric have, really developed a way to, put these chips on the edge to accelerate the compute, and be able to do incredible things in real time, in combination with the sensors and the software and the advancements of AI. We're really at the beginning for these. And I think what we're going to see, to go directly to the question, is we're going to see rollout in retirement communities, like these giant retirement communities in Florida. You're already starting to see it. Even May Mobility is doing airport runs and things where it's an uncontrolled environment, but it's somewhat controlled. You can map it. It's the same route over and over again. And we're going to see that roll out, I think, globally, in the next few years, because the costs have all come down. So now you can actually replace human labor in an economically viable way.
And Mitchell, you were laughing a bit at that LiDAR comment. You sound like you've been in the wars there a bit. But what I actually wanted to ask you is, you also kind of see, I guess, similar to what Josh was saying, that this kind of thing can be actually rolled out in a number of ways, like not necessarily on a large scale, but almost in different ways to suit different markets.
Yeah, so I think Cardigan is, I think, is one of the leading company for delivery robots. So I think they have great technology there, great partnership with Magna. The only challenging question I have is that I think the technology level is there to support. Beforehand, we didn't have good enough chip or good enough software, algorithms, and all that. Now I think all of that is in the level. But the key question I always ask these robotics delivery companies, like, the scale is challenging. It's the same questions. I mean, I guess I'm more pessimistic. It's the same challenging questions to, like, May Mobility, for example. I met them like 7, 8 years ago. Big, supporter from Toyota and all that. That was great. But at the same time, they were just going after these, what do you call it, like retirement areas, and which is hard to grab one by one. This market, you can't just deploy like this. And then these guys needs, like, it has to be geofence. HT map has to be done right before. They had to have a teleoperator, and the cost of like building that the full system was costly. Of course, it went down a lot now these days. So for these technology and companies, I think the scale is a question I always ask, that has to be somehow compromised. But the other hand, what I like Quadric and other companies are doing, is the fact that we are looking for like a really lower end chips with, like, let's say, for tops TI, and then we could do a vision, and let's say 2.5 or 3, whatever the number is. And there are some companies that can do it, which is low performance chip, because like what Vernon has said, the key question is, with high performing GPUs from NVIDIA, anyone could set up a system and just pull out and deploy. That's not hard. It's very doable. But for us, we have to think about the supply, the pricing, and how do you optimize it to provide to actual consumer and market. For us, is OEM usually. In that sense, we need to have two different streams. One is high-end model with expensive system and software, hardware, chips, and the low end. And this is hard. This is easier. And this leads to what we call, like Verma mentioned about the LLM and VLM. So one of the trends that we see in the AI side is, okay, language model is great, large is good, because it's large, we could do it in cloud. Okay, but there's no, there's a latency for real time calculation. Okay, then what do? We need to have less the compute power and maximize the NPU of, let's say, Qualcomm chip. But at the same time, the model itself has to be smaller, like a small language model. Can we squeeze in? It has to be super edge AI technology. And these are some of the areas that we're working on. And actual application will be like, even in the current Hyundai Kia car, if you ride on it, you could give a voice command of, let's say, 100. Oh, the weather, I want it high, low, the volume, high, low, call my wife. These are like pre-recorded commands. We could do that on a cloud base. And it's okay because it's not safety related. I'm not doing safety function command, right? Okay, pull the brake, stop the cruise. But at the same time, what we want to do is we want to be like an open AI, like more naturally. I'm giving that command. I'm just talking and asking or telling my car to do something. And it has to be very natural language, right? And then to do that, we need to have the edge AI technology. And someone as sort of like the quadrant could come in and then help us maximize and optimize the performance, the heating, and the power. So I'll stop here. I think I talked too much.
Okay, well, I actually was going to move on because you've talked a bit about the technology to the actual market. And we actually have a graph to indicate the next question, if it could come up on the screen. If we look at the actual funding patterns in autonomous driving technology, we can see that you look at like the actual funding patterns last year, they were almost up to the very peak of the sector in 2021. But the actual number of startups is pretty much the same level it was in 2020. So we're obviously looking at what is kind of a maturing market for this kind of sector. And what I really wanted to ask to start off with, I guess, I'll ask Josh this to start off with. Do you think we are kind of seeing a maturing sector? And if so, I guess is there still a good deal of room in the early stages to invest in this technology?
The short answer, like a good lawyer, it depends is the answer, right? Depends who you are and why you're investing. What I love about that graph is you could be showing the investment in agricultural technology or in soda pop, and it would probably show the exact same thing, right? Dumping money in 2021, and then a slow but gradual decline all the way to today, right? I think that's just reflective of, macroeconomic trends in more broadly. But look, if the big, so in, I can't remember the year now, when Cruise got acquired by GM, and I was at GM at the time, that served as a catalyst for an explosion of investment into autonomy. And then that continued for a number of years. And the reason why it continued is because there was an exit path. So at that time, you had all of the traditional automotive OEMs deciding that, hey, we need to play in this area and we need to develop our own autonomy. So now you have, 10 multi-billion-dollar companies that are acquiring early stage technology in order to build their own portfolio. And then you had all of the tech companies, the Apples, Google, or Alphabets, and Apples of the world, Meta, et cetera, really doing the same thing. And then you also had the tier ones doing the same thing, both because we were investing because that's what our OEM partners were looking for. And so we develop, design, engineer, manufacture components for our OEM partners. But also there was this notion in 2020, really starting like 2018, as we're living through it, that, hey, the world is changing and maybe like the OEM tier structure for the automotive industry is changing as well, right? That startups were working directly with OEMs instead of going through suppliers, and suppliers were getting into areas that were not traditional automotive. And, we felt like there was this white space that everyone could create, right? Like nobody had seen in a scaled way an electric scooter before. So when Bird got dumped into Santa Monica, it was, I'm getting questions of, hey, can Magna create a micromobility, scooter and company? Like, why not, right? We're not competing with, with GM and Toyota and BMW, our traditional customers. So maybe there's an opportunity here. And I think now we're kind of seeing, over the last 15 years, like how everything kind of shook out. It really comes down to the fundamentals of, are you building a technology that will ultimately lead to a product that people want? And that's always, I think, like this notion that the world has changed and yes and no, but I think the world kind of always stays the same. It comes down to the fundamentals of like, do people actually want this? So the question is, should we invest in autonomy today? Look, if you're a private investor, there are opportunities for you to jump on hype cycles and to make money. And if your goal is just to turn $5 into $100, yes, there's opportunities for early stage companies, particularly in robotics and humanoid robotics, and kind of some of the early stages of, I hate to call it AI because AI is not a product or a company. It's just an underlying tool, but there are companies that are building using AI to build real products. And if you want to jump on that hype cycle, you should, and you can make money. If you're a corporate that is looking for strategic partnerships, then I think it's really important to ask yourself, like, what's the end game here? What's the exit path? Because certainly in the next year, the exit path is not major IPOs. This bizarre SPAC craze has kind of died down now. We still have some SPACs, but they're not, it's not the liquidity that, people were hoping for in early 2020s. The major OEMs are not acquiring companies in this space now. So I think that you have to ask yourself, if you're a corporate or if you're a strategic investor, why are you invested? And what are you looking to invest in? There's certainly money to be made, but you should be thinking about a product that you're developing and investing in a company because their technology can help you launch a real product that real people want to use.
And Tony, are you seeing many of those companies right now at early stage?
I think your graphic that you showed is quite interesting. That it looks like a perfect wave, and as we've seen in lots of other industries, and Josh alluded to it, there are waves, right? And I think we're going to see another wave around investing in autonomy and EV. It won't be at the component level, which is what drove this first wave. So we're not going to see 20 more LiDAR startups coming online. We're not going to see advanced radar startups coming back. We're not going to see a lot more software-defined vehicle startups. I mean, that wave is pretty much over. The components have, the winners in those spaces have been recognized. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's an interesting opportunity here between integration going forward. For example, in the thermal area, right? If you combine autonomous vehicles with EV, the very nature of thermal systems has to change. And so there's some opportunities in areas like that when you think about what the future of autonomy/EV looks like, where you might see startups come online and you might see, some VC support it. More than likely, Josh is correct that you'll see a lot more of the tier ones and the OEM support them because they're trying to get to a solution that will deliver a very highly efficient product in the long term, right? Other opportunities may present themselves in another wave around e-commerce from the vehicle, right? That was kind of a hot button topic in 2016, 2017. It never really took off, but there's certainly opportunities that we think, enables when you start getting level 4, level 5, that, e-commerce in and out of the vehicle will be an interesting opportunity for OEMs to try and capture more revenue from. So I do think that there are going to be opportunities. I do think some early stage startups will materialize. I don't think we're going to have the huge number of startups that we had in 2014 through 2018 that were focused on automotive and all sorts of different technology areas.
And I guess the other kind of thing, when we look at kind of, I guess what we now are kind of calling a maturing sector, is that we start looking toward, if you're an investor, exits. Mitchell, like from your point of view, how does the kind of exit market look right now for autonomous mobility tech?
I think most of the exits are quite done. There's very few that's, I think, capable to exit. Exit means IPO or M&A. Most likely, I think there'll be some acqui-hire for the smaller startups. I don't see a reason to buy the entire company. They probably need some few IPs and key members that could continue the development of the algorithm. The larger companies, exits are already done, like Josh mentioned in the 2020s or a little bit earlier. OEMs in tier one, we were in this rush of, oh my God, we are far behind autonomous driving level 4 or 5. We need to figure it out. Can we do it in house? No, we're not capable because we don't know software. Okay, fine. Then let's just buy them out. Probably the easier way. So that's where even us, we look at a lot of these, the what do you call it, the big five players, like the back in the old day before GM, the Cruise. It was Cruise, the Zoox that was sold to Amazon, and Argo, and who else? Like Motional, used to be Aptiv. All of these players we met, and then while we were evaluating, and we were saying, okay, we need to do this catch-up play. Already one by one is being scooped up. Amazon picked up, and then GM and Ford, and we were like, oh my God, we were late in the game. So we started talking more closely with Emotional. And then, of course, we bought them. We, as in Hyundai, Kia, and Mobis, we are a major shareholder. So we acquired it with cash. So having said that, that's good. But a lot of these companies publicly spoken in previous years, the amount of R&D cost is so high. It's a billions of dollars and hundreds and thousands of employees and so much cost involved. And we have to pour this every year. And can we justify this pricing versus when is the market's going to come in, even if it's a small market? It never came true for these companies.
Are you
So
kind of,
yeah,
sorry, I was going to ask, are you getting hope at all by the fact that we had like WeRide and Pony AI both managed to IPO last year, and what was a very kind of constrained IPO market?
it was. I think they were kind of in a way. Personal thought is that they were kind of pushed to do the IPO. Otherwise, I don't think they could raise any more large capital, or they're not the candidate to be acquired because already the big players are acquired, and then we're already spending on top of the buying price. We are spending billions per year to maintain and develop. So those other like Rewrite Pony, very strongly focused and huge market in China, and then they have that way to go back to China and build more. What should I say? Models and also revenue and business. I think it's okay. They have the escape way, but cannot do any more like large mega rounds that we used to see in the past. So there's only one way. Either you have to, cut your pieces of the company and then try to sell piece by piece, or you just do a fire sale. Oh, please just take all of us at whatever price, or you try to go to the old way of spec or just a traditional IPO. But you can't really, pursue your, bidding price to above that when the market is not there, right? That's just never going to happen. So, I mean, a lot of these companies are either fire sale or they're forced to do IPO. Otherwise, how can they get private money? There's no other way. So they have to go to the public market and get public money by revealing all of the technology that they used to not to. And that was really a caveat for an investor like us. We are the first-hand information, right? And we picked up these insider technology before other guys. But now it's like public information. It's less attractive or appealing for a company like us. Um, Not easy these days, right? I would say.
And oh yeah, sorry, I was just going to ask you, Virban, because obviously you're on the startup side. What kind of interest are you seeing from like kind of corporate investors, or even I guess maybe people who are kind of interested in corporate M&A, at least from the automotive side?
Going back to your chart, right? I think the summary there, it's very encouraging. The peak that's coming about now is more consolidated. I saw 100 or so companies there, 125 versus 250 or so deals in 2021, right? If in any sector, the level of investment is the same as 2021, it's doing well because 2021 was crazy, right? So we're doing really well if you're getting up there in the $9 or so billion. Clearly, it's more consolidated. It's no longer spread in larger number of companies, but small, which telling us that money is going after more mature technologies, which happens in any way, right? The early startups versus the companies that come out of it, especially all of this tends to be deep tech, right? Like Josh was saying, there's so many sensors involved, software involved, commercialization, and then build a company on top, right? So fairly complicated stack there. And that's why you need uh, a lot more money, even at the later stage, right? And agree with Mitchell, right? The companies are being forced to go to public market and get their next round of capital, especially in the autonomous vehicle space. For ADAS, things look different. Uh, the a lot of interest in finding companies that are lined up to succeed in what's coming in ADAS and the deployments happening there. Again, a sign of late money chasing, more later stage, more mature startup that has, significant revenue plan already in place, right? As opposed to, hey, here's this cool technology, let's put 100 million to work here.
Okay, and we're into the last 10 minutes now, and we don't have any outstanding questions from any of the participants, which suggests to me that we've covered almost everything everyone wanted to actually hear. So I'm going to close with one last question. I'm going to ask everyone, well, really two questions. Where do you see the next wave of investment going into in this space? Which area? And what makes you excited right now? And I'm going to start with you, Virban, just because we haven't started with you for any of these yet.
Both, I think we're going to see across the whole stack, right? We're already seeing investments in robotics, especially around companies that are going after just the software, right? They're taking mostly commodity hardware, sensors, and figuring out the AI model. That's their moat, right? We're going to build a foundational model. And similar activity we're seeing in the end-to-end model race with OEMs, tier ones. They are also going after, hey, let's go after this end-to-end self-driving model. Maybe Tesla is driving everyone to go that route. So that's definitely one space of like models, right? Good models, companies that can build, maintain, ship those, and commercialize those models. And get them to ship in these vehicles, right? Some are pure verticals. If you look at some of the robotics plays today, they're going all the way, right? They're building the robot, setting up the factory to build and ship robots. So they are their own tier one and OEM and the software, everything, full vertical, right? The other space is, I think we'll see a third wave of platform, not around sensors, but the compute problem is still not solved. If you see, there isn't an IPO company selling compute in embedded systems today, right? Especially in these complex ones that is anything other than NVIDIA at volume, right? Even NVIDIA actually is not at volume on edge devices, mostly at data center, right? So the embedded compute space is still wide open for, hey, who's going to emerge as the volume leader that actually ships in vehicles and builds and I plan towards IPO. So that's still an unsolved problem, which we're seeing still investors, deep tech investors taking a look at it and pouring money.
And Tony, you mentioned kind of the crossover between autonomous and EVs earlier.
Yeah, so I think I agree certainly with what Ravan said about compute. There's another wave there that needs to get delivered in order for level 4, level 5 to become a reality. I know, in the previous administration, President Trump was not a super big supporter of EVs. We'll see if that continues in this current administration. If it does, then that certainly sort of sets back maybe a little bit of the progress that could be done on the integration between EVs and autonomy technologies. But I think there's certainly opportunities there. I mentioned the thermal is one area where you're going to essentially need a complete redesign of the thermal unit in an EV. And that then leads to interesting design possibilities in the vehicle itself. So there's certainly opportunities there. More highly efficient electrical systems are going to be chased by a lot of tier ones and OEMs. I mentioned the e-commerce possibilities in and out of vehicles. One thing I think I would mention is that I think in the last, if you looked at us 5-6 years ago, we were still very externally focused on the investment side. So LiDARs, radars, sensors, compute technologies. I think over the last 2 years, we've become a little bit more internally focused. And so looking at, how can we gain efficiencies in our facilities, factories, our humanoid robotics going to become a player in that, other different kinds of robotics in the facilities. So I think there's going to be an interesting mix of things that we look at over the next 2 to 3 years, both external and internal. And a lot of it will be driven by how we see, the market, especially in the autonomous side, developing.
And Josh and Mitchell, you have about a minute each left. So I'm just going to go to you quickly first, Josh.
Okay, what's next? If I had to pick two areas that I think are going to be the next wave, I think materials is going to be enormous in the future. It's so hard to commercialize a new material, but with the advancements in large language models, material discovery is, I think, going to be the next big thing. It's going to be really exciting. And then I would point to, Tony mentioned it earlier, but if I had $1 billion in my own money, I would be putting it towards experiences in transportation devices, whether that's, in a car or a bus, train, or an airplane. The technology is there. It's really just about building a business. And I think we said it earlier that the technical experience inside of a Chinese vehicle is far and away better than what all of us here are driving on a daily basis. And once the North American market, the European market gets exposed to that, consumers are going to demand it. And I think that's going to be a huge, huge wave.
And Mitchell, you have about a minute.
Thanks, Josh, for sparing a minute. So if I had $1 billion, I would put all my money to Tesla. But actually, my investment thesis and the topic it aligns very closely with Verman and Frederick. I was very surprised because I was going to say the same thing. Foundation model for human robots and other areas very important for us because we don't make models. Second, how do we do the end-to-end like Tesla? Because Tesla is doing 3 models to 1, so that's like a single brain. It used to be 3 brains, right? You perceive and you analyze, you take actions. We used to do it all separately. It's doing it in 1 millisecond. How do you do that? We can't do it. Many companies cannot do that. So we're interested in that. And embedded computing, of course, very important because more and more the CPU, GPU, NPU that we use in the car, we need to figure this out, how to do it efficiently. And thermal management, like Tony mentioned twice, and we're also looking to that. Because for our EV, battery is hot, and heat is always a problem. It's like the more we use the battery in the car, it's like a global warming in the car. How do we suppress the temperature? This is so hard with the conventional cold plate or the other ways. So we're looking to that space too. So I'll just stop here.
Okay, fantastic. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their contributions today. Tony Canestra from Denso, Mitchell Yun from Hyundai Mobis Ventures, Josh Berg from Magna Technology Ventures, and Vibon Ketapal of Quadric.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rob.
The next webinar, the next wave webinar is going to be on March 13th. That's Thursday instead of a Wednesday next month, and that's going to be Going Global, how CVCs can successfully expand into new markets, and that's going to be in partnership with TDK Ventures. You can register for the webinar on our website. Upcoming events, we've got the GCVI Summit in Monterey, California. I think I'm sure we'll see some of the panel there. That's one of the 2 big events of the year. We've got GCV Connect events coming up in Madrid in April, and then a couple of weeks later in Singapore in May. And then you'll be able to see me at the GCV Symposium in London in June. And don't miss GCV Institute, our upcoming courses. We have CVC investment programs in person in Silicon Valley in mid-March, right about when the summit's going on. Then live online in April on the 8th and the 10th, and then in person in London, June 16th, 17th, when the symposium's on. And then another online course, Learning the Value of Corporate Venturing, and that's going to be between April and June this year. Okay, thank you for joining us, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. We do love feedback. If you've joined us live, there'll be a survey that comes up when in the web browser when you exit the session, and please take that. Let us know what you think, and yeah, contact details. Maya Palmer, editor of GCV. You can email her here. And Liz Arrington, who's as managing director of GCV Institute, is in charge of professional development and benchmarking. And James Gunnell, managing director of commercial at GCV. All their web addresses are on the screen right now. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.